Welcome to the LSI Behind the Wind podcast. My name is Sean Slatter, and for 30 years, I've dedicated my life to the science of business development. I've seen the impact of our work, which has evolved into economic development and now social impact. And on this episode, I'm so excited. I have asked Chuck Coonradt to join me again. Chuck and I talked early on in our podcast series, and it was one of the most downloaded podcasts to date. We have had significant interest and questions about our discussion, and I think you're really going to enjoy this follow-on discussion that I've had with Chuck. Chuck is an amazing individual. He is the father of gamification. He led the game theory, which is now taught throughout so many management schools and Ivy League curricula. And he really has developed over the last 50 years a methodology and a concept that is so relevant today as we talk about working with a remote workforce and leading remote organizations through a virtual environment. His concept around game theory and gamification is extremely relevant, and I think you're really going to enjoy this. We also have done a lot of joint work together using the concept of scorekeeping tied to business development, and we even talk about this in our discussion, collaborating in the past and potentially collaborating more in the future. So enjoy this discussion that I've had with Chuck, number 2. To date, he's the only guest that we've had on this podcast twice, and he's an amazing individual that I think you'll really enjoy listening to this discussion. Let's just pick up where we left off, and that maybe just start with a quick summary. We did the whole history of the game of work, game theory, how it came about, but will you just summarize again what is game theory, gamification, and how you have been bringing this to organizations for the last 50 years?
Sure. I mean, we've been all this time on a contract basis, so I've been probably fired 6,000 times if I talked about all the things that, all the deals that are finished. So,
me too.
Yeah. So there's, I think we're not gonna, and the other thing is I'm not the youngest guy in the world. I'm at least a generation ahead of Sean. So there aren't a lot of people around to sue me. So.
Whatever.
I think we can have some good times, but I want to come back to what I would call a major difference between the game of work and gamification as the gamers, if you will, have done. But the core principles, again, are the frequency that the feedback is more frequent in recreation than it is in work. Now, one of the problems that we have with the remote workforce, or a hybrid workforce for that matter, is we've just exacerbated an age-old problem. And the age-old problem is you work for me 2,080 hours a year, or 2,000, an FTE, a full-time equivalent that we've all talked about, is 2,000 hours worth of work in production. And traditionally, organizations provide feedback in a formal 45-minute annual presentation, and which is a little bit like when your spouse asks you how you like dinner. You say, well, let's just put that together and have a little sit down on our anniversary and cover that. It is just obscene and irrational. And so what we've missed as American leaders and managers is the appropriate frequency of feedback. And if we go to a golf course and play 36 holes, 8 hours, we're going to get feedback somewhere between 144 and 210 or something, whatever the stroke count is. But we recreationally, we get feedback every time we work, plant a ski pole, make a turn, squeeze a trigger on a shotgun in a sporting clays course, or out in the field hunting pheasants, play a card, move a mahjong tile. It's all right there. And what has happened with the advent of electronics and screens and iPhones and all that sort of stuff. Somebody sent me something the other day and said, I'm watching a 3-year-old download apps on a smartphone, and I just figured out how to turn it off without taking the battery out. So, I didn't think there was any reason for me to have an iPhone 13 Pro until 2 of my grandchildren showed up with them at Christmas. I'm going, how can you have phone envy with a 12-year-old? I mean, what is the, but what has happened, and we all see this, is that you're having a dinner with your family and somebody says, what was that thing about, this just happened, what was that thing about the elephants in China that went off on some rogue trek? And before anybody starts to evidence an opinion, somebody's got a phone out Googling China rogue elephant trip, and so we have the whole thing. Now, when I was a kid years ago, that sort of thing would be met by go look it up in your Funkin' Wagnalls or your Encyclopedia Britannica. Well, you talk about encyclopedias today and people go, oh, what, tell me again. There are 16 volumes. They took 3 feet of space, and then they sent you an update annually. Why wouldn't they just update it contemporaneously? So this workforce that we have today is being separated from, if you will, the umbilical cord of the organization that provides this feedback and this nutrition. Now, at the base of all of this, that I've come to realize, and Wooden said it's what you learn after you know it all, that I've come to the realization is at the core of this is appreciation. And what happens is if in organizations, when you're walking down the hall and you pop your head in and somebody says, hey, we just got a new deal. Hey, we just finished something. You have the opportunity as a leader to, number one, say thank you, to give them feedback at an appropriate level. All of that works. Well, now the spontaneity of that is fundamentally gone because of this hybrid workforce, and so even if you've got people on a 2-day, 3-day split or a 1-day, 4-day split, whatever it is, in order to have that same spontaneity, you have to somehow orchestrate the leader and the leadee and the event and the right time of day. And again, we're getting into this just bizarrely improbable numerics. It just, you're looking for you're looking for a meteor shower at the right time. It doesn't, and all the meteor showers in the daytime don't get paid, don't get credit for it, and that kind of thing. So feedback becomes the cornerstone of the game of work, and that's the human element that makes sense. Now, we drive the feedback with a series of scorecards that allow the coach and the player to agree on the frequency and the quality and the type of feedback that's appropriate. So that's the reason for the scorecard. The whole core, though, is that if you watch, and this is maybe the dangerous part of gaming, not in the business, But in gaming, if you get shot, you hit reset. And so you have this non-parallel, life-threatening option. There's no, I wound up doing a bad job, I got fired. Where's the reset button?
Right.
When do I come back? Is this like a week off and then you want me on Monday? No, you're fired. Well, what does that mean? Well, I was talking so this absence of consequence, there's no real, I had 7 of my grandchildren in a house in Florida that we rented for Christmas. And, periodically they're playing a game called Minecraft, which you can play on each other's boards. And periodically we would have this death curdling shrill come out of one of the kids, and you go, what happened? Well, Jackson destroyed my house. And for this, you want to hang him up by his heels and beat him with a stick like a. I'm going, I don't get, but that's the magnet. That's this arena that our young people in the workforce come out of. Is reset, maybe a disproportionate amount of consequence versus action. This idea you can just scrub your failure.
Yeah,
I've not found that to work too well, but it's that providing the feedback. So now the surveys that are being done about hybrid workforces are saying that you need to be at a double or triple volume of your outreach and connection. So, you've got 50 people in a team or a group, and almost all of what they do is remote, and the majority of meetings end by pressing that little red thing down in the lower right-hand corner.
Right.
So we don't necessarily debrief as we need to. One of the things that the Israelis created and we adopted is this concept of an after-action report militarily.
Yeah.
We don't do a very good job of that in the meeting because people are in and out and paying attention and not paying attention. So we've lost this touch. And we talked last time about Faith Popcorn and the popcorn report. And Faith, I'm going to say 2 decades ago, Sean, identified this idea that in high tech, you need to have high touch. So the scorecard, the dashboard that we're getting really, really good at creating, but not really, really good at using, is not a substitute for the connectivity to the leader.
So let me pull on that thread for a minute. If
Sure.
You are a leader now, like it has happened in the last 2 years, and you have responsibility for an organization that is all virtual, how would you implement how would you implement this constant feedback, appreciation, and then introduce the scorecard concept to your team so that they don't feel like they're being micromanaged?
Well, and that, going back to what I said a minute ago about scoreboards and that stuff, we do this thing called the leaderboard, which is ranking the guy at the top, the gal next, which by and large disenfranchises 80% of the names on the sheet.
I agree.
One. Its origin, I believe, was in the used car business. So that you fired the guy or the gal that was at the bottom of the list. It's Neanderthal at best.
Glenn Ross. It's that movie that you first you get a new car, second you get knives, right? And then everybody else is fired.
Yeah. So it's just, it again is the implementation. So if the leaderboard, and you drew it out, it would be this 80-20 curve mathematicians call an asymptote, which you have to enunciate very clearly in polite conversation. But when you look at that, you really need to be recognizing the amount of progress that each individual makes up rather than knocking some plain king of the mountain, right? So again, that's another miss between game of work and current gamification. So I hate leaderboards. I think you have to make sure that you're celebrating individual performance. Now, a leaderboard looks for a single winner. Game of work looks to maximize the number of winners. So you asked a good question. The scorecard has traditionally been catching people doing it wrong. So we measure errors, we measure accidents, and we measure stuff that not only did we not want repeated, we never wanted it to happen in the first place. So you can get more attention having an industrial accident than you can doing a good job for 2,000 hours.
That's right.
Bad promise. So
Yes.
the key is to recognize the scorecard of the things that are most important for that position to do. Then in sport, this is why I like, which I love, to deal with from the sports analogy standpoint. But if you look at Donovan Mitchell with the Utah Jazz, okay, we want points, we want assists, we want steals, we want an absence of turnovers, and but everything about that is driven to what we pay Donovan to do.
Yeah.
We don't go back and say, well, he makes most of his shots, so why don't we make it easy and count the shots he missed? Because there's fewer of those. You laugh and I laugh, but we actually did a major company that I really can't identify, Lauren, but we did a major company who tried to steal a game of work, and we really were on the verge of going to court. But what they had done in this corporate overview is they had picked out all the negatives, missed deliveries, missed stops, missed et cetera. And then they called up and said, we don't understand why this isn't working. So,
yeah, right.
Okay. I mean, it looked just like your stuff, Chuck. Let me get a copy of that because I think the attorney wants to hear that from you.
Yeah, right. I love it.
So you have to, I quipped one time, I was sitting on a board at Westminster about how to enhance their MBA program. And I said, just two requirements. I said, number one, you need to give each one of these candidates a puppy, and they need to train the puppy because they will learn more about dealing with people training the puppy than in any of these classes. That almost got me thrown out. Then we said, the second thing you need to do is you need to have each one of these candidates send home an employee for a personal hygiene problem. Because who you are as a manager is more defined in that moment than anything else that happens during the day. So
that's right.
We just, I guess, if you wanted to scream at it, we just need to get real. We just need to look at what works. So you could put 80,000 people in an NFL or a college stadium on a weekend at a football game. Many of them spending a disproportionate amount of their income to be there and support that team. And, which was so tragic about the Bulls being canceled is that you got these people from North Carolina came, all the way to San Diego, and then
didn't happen.
So you say, well, why are they there? Well, they're there because that feedback of, they're living vicariously through their team, which is appropriate. And that activity that they're celebrating or chagrining or shouting or booing or whatever is very right on time. So we need as leaders to be able to say to those individuals, these are the most important things you're doing. The reason I want you to keep track is because I want to be able to deliver appropriate feedback. Now, if I have a scorekeeping system or a leaderboard or any other metric, and I'm not coaching off of it. And as one of our company presidents said many years ago, but I've never forgotten it, she said, a scorecard is just an excuse to have a conversation.
That's so great.
That's brilliant.
So great. It's
Yeah.
brilliant.
So if if I can identify what a fair day's work is and what a fair day's pay is. Now we've done like humongous research on the fair day's pay. In fact, we had these Lake Wobegon surveys to measure what average people are in your industry or somebody else. And then we got to make sure, like Lake Wobegon, that everybody's above average. So, so we're all over that. And, the people in Washington are worried about the minimum wage. Well, restaurants are paying $20 an hour.
That's right.
Yeah. And they're going, we got to do something about the $7.50. Well,
that's right.
We did a great job of that by paying people to stay home. So
that's right.
All of this sort of works together. But the point is that when you're in a labor crunch like we are, especially in the state of Utah, we're like less than 2%.
Right.
They're trying to figure out a new thing to call that, because it's technically full employment.
It's negative employment, negative unemployment.
Yeah, there's a phrase you never thought you'd hear yourself say.
As an economist, negative unemployment.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm glad we worked on that. And I clearly lost my train of thought. But the point is that when you're in that kind of a labor market, you can price yourself in getting that to happen. But the $20 an hour results in the Big Mac now being $6.50 and not $4.75.
That's right.
Or however that math works out. So you can try to price yourself to get whatever labor is available, which if you're chasing a rare resource. But at some point in time, $20 an hour at McDonald's, Wendy's, Arby's, Del Taco, you need a differentiation. And,
that's right.
And the only differentiation that there really is how am I treated? So
that's right. Exactly.
So the key is today, always has been, time immemorial, I think, is that the way people feel about an organization is primarily dictated by the way they feel about the person they work for, the person we call a coach. And you can look in sport, you can look in competitive sport, you can look at the NFL, you can look at college basketball, men's or women's, and you find the coaches, you find the Pat from Tennessee. What was her name? Tragically lost her. Pat Summers, anyway. But you find that person, you find the John Woodens, you find the people that literally those players would follow, through hell and come out the other side. You look at the Miracle on Ice and the example that Herb Brooks was, just.
It's a great story.
Yeah. And that's what you want to emulate. If you're looking for anything that's in the realm of rightness and what do I borrow and what do I emulate, that's the kind of stuff you look for, is how do I become, no, her name's Pat Sumption. How do I come to the Pat Sumption, the Nick Saban, John Wooden, the Coach K at Duke basketball, so that you have people that have that you're really focused as a servant leader, which I think is core, is a companion book to the game of work. Because if you're making it important for your people, if you're helping them win, if you're helping them get where they want to go, Zig Ziglar said you can have anything you want as long as you get enough other people what they want.
Exactly.
So,
well, let me tell you two funny stories that came out of our first discussion. The first one was we had this amazing, young, high potential member of our team that walked into my office after listening to our previous discussion, and she said to me, "I just want to assure you that I'm not a millennial." I'm I'm a Gen Z.
I'm a what? A Gen?
Gen Z.
Yeah.
Gen Z. I'm not a millennial. I'm a Gen Z. I love that. I thought that was awesome. The second story was from some feedback that I received from one of our clients. I went out and saw one of our clients who listened to our discussion, and he said to me, "You having this discussion with Chuck was so important, and it could not have come at a better time for me." He said, "I was having such a problem with dealing with my younger millennials and listening to Chuck talk about it's every generation has had this.
Sure.
You just need to know this is what works. This is how you leverage the talents of this group, and they're going to do amazing things." And he said it's changed my entire attitude and how I approach my team. He said that he had had a meeting with his HR director, and this is where I was going with this. Prior to our discussion, he'd had this meeting with his HR director and said, "We are never going to hire another millennial ever, not ever." And his HR director said, "You can't say that." And he said, I was just down. I was down on this millennial generation that he called it. I was down on the work from home, remote workforce. He said, this discussion that you had with Chuck changed my thinking and changed my attitude. He said, I'm excited now. I'm excited to connect with my millennials, to connect with my remote workers, my work from home workers, because I'm thinking about it differently. So I just wanted to share those two stories with you because I thought both of them were fascinating.
Well, here's, the first one, just as I'm thinking about it, summarizes something we maybe don't talk about very often, but nobody likes to be grouped.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
What that young lady was saying to you is, I'm me. Okay. I might do something that looks like a millennial, but I'm me. Okay?
That's right.
And
don't put me in that bucket.
No, because, I have, as a millennial, I would have friends that are absolutely millennials. But none of us, that's prejudice. And none of us really wants to be the victim
Right.
of prejudice. And so what we want to do is to really create this one-on-one dialogue between a coach and a player. And one of the first things that organizations need to do is to have less big Zoom meetings.
I agree.
Right?
Absolutely.
And this idea, when I say, are you coaching your people? And somebody says, yeah, we have a staff meeting every Tuesday. How many people are there? Well, 12 to 30, Uh-huh. And how many people talk at a time? One, okay. And that's usually you, yeah. And you say, well, how does that really get the answers? If you look at an NFL team and you look at the relationship between the number of players they have and the number of coaches they have, it's like nuts. I mean, it's like 3 to 1. There's a coach for every 3 people.
That's
You
right.
get 17 coaches in a 52-person roster. And that tells you something, because it says that I've got now they do it because of easily identifiable individual skill positions that you want somebody to work with. So you got wide receivers, that's so, but there's a lesson there. And when you talk about, I don't want this to be just all big guys competing for a football, but when you talk about the phrase that is often used with coaches is he's a quarterback whisperer, okay, and that he is able to work that position. Well, that's a one-on-one deal.
Yeah, that's right.
And
that's exactly right.
If you look at, even from a religious standpoint, for the last 2,000 years, it's kind of a one-on-one deal.
Absolutely.
And you can get a mega church with 7,500 people coming to attend and get a message, or you can have hundreds of thousands of people, I guess, watching televangelism and get the message. But when you start to work on conversion and behavior change and service to mankind and that sort of thing, that's been a one-on-one deal for 20 centuries.
I love that. I've got a close friend who has a consulting company that's smaller than ours, but he and I have collaborated over the years, and it's been a 10-year more, I guess, dialogue between us as two CEOs where we're sharing best practices, what's working, what's not. And I've really have appreciated that. It's really been beneficial to me to bounce ideas off of him, and he has reciprocated over the years. And one of the things that I talked to him about last year in the sending everybody home, we sent whatever it was, 1,800 people home, and trying to run the enterprise from a cave. And he said, here's what we decided. We decided we were going to put 3 senior leaders on 6 of our employees. And they would check in with each of our individually. These leaders would check in with each individual employee 3 times a day. They would do a 15-minute meeting in the morning, a 15-minute meeting midday, and a 15-minute meeting at the end of the day to determine how are things going, what do they need, do they have questions, what progress had they made since their last call. And I said, whoa, that is unbelievable that you're putting that kind of those resources and that dedication by individual.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, here's what we found. He said, we found our accountability went up, our efficiency dramatically improved. He said, tasks that used to take a week were being done now in a day. He said, we quickly recognized who was committed and who wasn't. And your recommendations around this one-on-one interface by individual, you're not a number, just a payroll number. You are a member of this team. You were hired to be successful, and provide that kind of appreciation is really the essence of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
I want to shift gears for a second, if we could, Chuck. We've talked about being a leader in the concept of gamification, game of work. What do you do with this organization? What do you tell individuals who are the members of the team, the individual members of the team? How do you manage yourself as a member of the team under this concept of the game of work? I mean, because the majority of the individuals listening to this discussion between us are going to say, yeah, I wish I had this. I wish I had that kind of constant feedback from my leadership. I wish I had scorecards that I could determine what's going well, what's not. We're tracking progress. I wish I had this infrastructure in place. I'm in the organization. I don't have that. I'm never going to have that. If you're an individual trying to be successful in your work, in your delivery, what advice do you have for the individual to utilize your game theory to make your career successful?
Not to be clip, but do it. Everything you just said is a popular attitude for people that are, let's say, in the bowels of the organ, in the bowels of the beast. But some of the greatest stories that I would share with you have not been top down in this thing, but they've been bottom up. So
That's right.
we had a bank in Ogden, Utah, and we had the assistant to the president in the room. Now she doesn't have, and by the way, in all declaration, the game of work works everywhere except with personal assistants. Now we got Lauren choking on her Coke. It just, that is such, and the other place it doesn't work is in emergency rooms. I found that out. That's a long story, but so this.
Let me just stop you. Why do you say it doesn't work with personal assistants?
Well, because the right kind of relationship is acting on behalf of the executive.
Yep.
Okay. And that is more magical. That it's more art than science.
Oh my goodness.
We did spend some time saying, my executive assistant, this is terribly telling, but I go out one day and she's got this scorecard up and it's a line graph and it's just pristine game of work quality. I said, Nancy, what is that? She goes, that's the mean days between mean days. I said, and
oh,
Nancy was with me for like, I don't know, 15 years.
I remember she was
just impeccable, over the top. Couldn't have had a better deal. Okay. I said, so tell me more. She goes, well, that's the number of days that goes before you get mean. And or I leave something undone, or, but we always talk about the mean days between sales, the mean days between new contracts. And so she took that scorecard and made it the mean days between. not my proudest story, but
I have a similar story. I came into work one day and my assistant had taped to my desk a little cartoon. In the first block, it was this boss just, yelling at his assistant. In the next block, the assistant was yelling back, and she had this caption under it that said, I can't read your mind. And the third block was the boss yelling back at her, you could at least try. And let me just tell you, I have got the world's greatest assistant. Summer is, I am so amazingly fortunate to be working with Summer because she runs the organization and she's incredible. And so I was so interested to hear you say, yeah, this concept doesn't work with executive assistants, because actually I think that Summer and I have been working a version of scorekeeping and the entire game of work concept for years now, where we never let a day go by where we don't connect, talk about what happened, what didn't happen, what went well, what didn't go well, and anything else that needs. It has been going on for years, and it's incredible. And I could not do what I do without Summer. She is this amazing individual that is how I found her. I don't know, but
well,
so sorry
let's just spend a minute with that, though, Sean. What it really says is that Summer has adopted your goals.
She has.
And she's adopted your scorecards. And she's committed to supporting your scorecards. And that's the conversation that we usually have with executives and executive assistants.
It's amazing.
Is if you can't break out, and this is a game work principle, if you can't break out the individual's contribution, then you have to meld the individual to the outcome of the group he or she is part of.
Absolutely.
So,
And for her to understand vision and corporate objectives and then migrate that to close is just, it's remarkable to see that happen. And you're right, it is incredible. So if you're a member of the
let's go back to the individual in the application. And so it's really easy, especially if you were raised by a helicopter parent, who brought you a pencil if you missed it in the third grade. It's really easy to express abdication and frustration, as you just did, not about summer, but in our previous conversation about, I'm in the bowels of the beast. What can I do?
Right.
So we're at the bank, and Connie, I'll never forget this. She said, she came in, first off, it was, I only have the receptionist who reports to me. She just answers the phone. Now, first off, anytime you hear the word just or only, it's going to change the sign of what comes next. So there's another principle for it. But so I said, well, how does she make a difference? And this is the key. But the magic question really is, as you have a dialogue between a coach and a player, or in this instance, between me and myself, the question is this: what is it that you or I, as an individual, get done that's extremely valuable to the organization that is not being recognized and rewarded? That's a bunch of words. And the first time that question is asked, even if I'm asking myself, I kind of respond with a deer in the headlight looks, because nobody ever asked me that before. And if you ask people to tell you about their job, they will have a tendency to tell you what they do, not what they get done.
Yes.
So I'm saying, all right, consider yourself. You're down in the bowels of the beast. You have assignments, stuff comes to you, you have inputs, you have outputs. What's the difference you make? Okay, now, that won't be an easy, apparent answer. And sometimes we spend a lot of time in an engagement working through that. But if you stick with it, say, no, I really want to know what it is that you do that contributes to that. And I want to know that as a leader so I can recognize it. Okay, makes perfect sense. Now, as an individual, I want to know that for me. Okay?
That's right.
And we find all the time as we go through organizations, we find what people often call closet scorekeepers. And these are people that have figured out how they go home at the end of the day feeling okay about what they got done, regardless of what they're asked to do.
Or do they get feedback, or were they recognized, or were they paid to do that?
Yeah. But people who literally have created a scorecard, and that's why I'm saying anybody can start doing this. You can practice the game of work tomorrow, wherever you are.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's what's the win? Now, once I do that, I begin to get the ability to differentiate between a good day and a bad day.
Yes.
Most of us would rather have more good days. So if I can deal with that and I can create what we call a results to resources ratio, or a PER, like yards per game or points per game or whatever it is. But if I can create that for me, then I've got a hand up.
That's right.
And because I operate on the premise that I'm leasing my body to the company, I didn't sell it. They don't own it. I'm leasing it to them. I may have to go find a new lessor in the future that's more appreciative. But think about being in an interview now with me coming in, and you say, well, tell me about what you've done, where you are, and everything else. And I start showing you scorecards. about the three most important things that I got paid for and how well I improved it. The reason I'm here is because they didn't give me appropriate feedback and appreciate me. And all I really would like to do, Mr. Slatter, is to understand what it is that you want done, and we'll take this approach. Most of us would get out of our chair and say, why don't you come sit here and I'll just work, I'll work for you.
Exactly.
So that's what I would say to people that are in an organization, is recognize that you are an entrepreneur. We can go spend some time on that. But that's really what you are. You've leased your skill and expertise to LSI, to Game of Work, to the federal government. You've leased your talent and skills. Well, if you're going to do that, you're going to market your talents and skills internally and externally. And what better way to do that than to be maximally accountable? And by the way, if nobody notices, you still get a chance to walk out at the end of the day knowing whether you won or lost.
That's right. And I think there's a lot of that's going on in organizations where you've got individuals working for a leader who is of this mindset. I grew up in an organization. I got yelled at every day. I didn't cry. I never got a single thank you for 20 years of hard work. They're now working with these younger generations who there is not communication. They don't operate that same way. And I think having the individual recognize that, okay, I'm part of this organization. I have a boss who is horrible. I'm either going to make my career fantastic and meaningful and have an impact because it's the right thing, or I'm going to find something else to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I mean, let's be real candid here. Here's the elephant in the room relative to this coming back to work, is that most of those COOs that are in their 50s and 60s are scared to death that they're not getting a full day's work, and that those people that they're paying are sitting home playing video games. All right.
It's exactly right.
Okay. So 1974 or 5, I have the epiphany on the Game of Work. All right. And now you have a situation where I'm afraid they're playing video games where they get frequent feedback, clear goals, good coaching, improvement basis, or I'm working for you, Pinhead, and right. You don't care who I am.
Right.
Okay. So here we have problem, definition, and solution all in the same issue. Let me tell you the story quickly about what Connie did, because it's amazing. So she goes to the receptionist and she said, how can you make a difference? And this was in the days, this was years ago, when you weren't banking on your phone. You had to call to get your balance. And so the majority of phone traffic into the bank is, can I get my balance? You send them to the balance people and they come back. Well, and I forget the receptionist's name, and that's tragic, but she said she just decided to see if she could be more engaging. So she said to the caller, as every chance she got, what else can I do for you? Simple deal. What else can I do for you? And then she started tracking the number of times she asked that per the total number of calls. So she's got a scorecard. Then the next step is how many of the people she asked actually stopped long enough and thought about it and said, well, I need a car loan, or so she's got that number. Now she's got 2 scorecards. Then she asked the loan officers to give her feedback on how many of those people that she sent over actually resulted in a transaction. So now we've got somebody in an organization who is lower quartile, maybe lower percentile in terms of compensation, having a way to win on 3 important things that she can do to build the business in the bank And I think at one point in time, she even started to aggregate the total amount of stuff that she was the trigger on. So
I
how does
love
that
that.
change? How does that change her perception of, nope, I just answer the phone?
Well, and this will help me transition into this next question that I have for you. But before I do, we worked an engagement with a Fortune 500 company that I thought was one of the most insightful leadership decisions and strategies I've seen in my 30-year career. And that was this senior executive of this multi-billion dollar organization said the primary interface with our customers is not our salespeople, it's our delivery people. And they need to understand how to interface with the customer when they have an issue, when they have a need. And they had us build a process for them around acquiring new business for a non-sales individual. And we delivered that to 4,000 individuals in the organization. I thought it was brilliant. Exactly what you said with this receptionist who was having the primary interface with the company's customers and making a difference, maybe millions of dollars of revenue through her attitude, through her interest in their needs and fulfilling that. I love it. So that leads me into this final thread that I want to bring up with you, and that is you have worked with a lot of business development organizations. A lot of your work, I know, has been around sales and business development. We've talked generally about organizations, about being a leader, about being an individual. When you have been brought into organizations who have said, we want you to take your concept and help our business development organization become successful, transition out of the Glenn Ross mentality to something that is really functional. Where do you start?
Well, we try to work out of an inverted triangle. I can't even do that on the screen, but in one of those upper corners is the player, whatever that might be, sales rep, inside sales, etc. In the other corner is the coach or the leader. And they're in that triangle for these two reasons. Number one, the player has the best view of the job. I think it was Drucker that said that we'll make more headway in productivity the minute we recognize that the person doing the job knows more about it than the person supervising it. So
no kidding.
Yeah, so you get that individual, then you get the leader or the coach because he or she knows what they're being held accountable for. Okay? So we got job familiarity and responsibility for results and that category. And on the bottom is the game of work. It's either a game of work facilitator or it's reading the criteria for a scorecard in game of work or in scorekeeping for success, which is really the how-to manual, and starting to put that together. But that's what you do in any organization, any relationship. So, there's the old life insurance premise that if you make 75 calls a day, something good will happen. Fine. And we probably burn through more people in that industry than any other. But if you start to say, okay, what are the triggers in that sales funnel? And how do I find out? Well, I've got to get first off, I do need some calls per day because I need a raw material thing to start from. And that might be one. I mean, if you're working on some of the stuff that LSI works on, you're on the whole other end from the Fuller Brush guy who's knocking on doors, and who gets feedback every door. You've got long-term projects, major stuff, goofy bidding procedures and all of that to go through. So whatever that is, that's fine. But the key is that you start from what is the closing ratio, and then you go back to what are the closing opportunities and what do I have to do just before I do that. So there's a chapter in, I think it's Managing the Obvious, where I wrote
Yeah.
what happens just before. And you don't run out of cash without something happening just before, which is poor collections procedure. And you don't get poor until you got the invoicing right. So you sort of start with that result and then say, what is the next level of resources that I need to get that done? And as I start to build that back, then I get to the point where I'm in control of the input. And then the rest of it is starting to manage the efficiency. So if I have somebody in the team that can set up a closing opportunity for every 5 prime buying motive discovery meetings, we used to call them because we want to be very specific. If you get somebody does 1 and 5 and somebody else that does 1 and 3, then let's go learn from what's happening in the business. And this is not just taking a leaderboard and ranking.
That's right.
Ultimate results. It's really getting down into the technology of the business. And, there's a book called Moneyball that was written about, what's that guy's name? Billy. Anyway, it was with the Oakland Athletics. And he essentially went out and said, there's a different way to measure this game. There's a different way to understand what the inputs are in the game. So you can tell Summer that we're just about done.
Okay, and I think you're exactly right. It's even some basic metrics, Chuck. When I talk to large, mature Fortune 500 companies, and I'll say, what's your win rate? They have no idea. I'll even say, what's your objective for capture this year? They don't know. Let's start there.
Yeah.
Let's start with something that basic. What is your capture objective this year? What is your win rate? Most organizations have no clue. And that is why they are surprised at the end of the year. Oh my goodness, we didn't win anything. We went backwards. Okay, one final question I have for you, and let me set you up a little bit, Chuck. A few years ago, I read this large book on Frank Lloyd Wright, who I had really admired, and he's got this incredible background, as you know, and became one of the most famous architects of all time. And what most people don't realize is that the majority of his work was done in his 70s and 80s, that he really felt like he did not achieve this maturity until he was in his 70s and even into his 80s. He was still doing some of his best work well into his 80s. And the story is that he builds this institute in the desert of Arizona, Taliesin West, and he's got all of these kids that come and live on this compound and learn from him. And when most people are at that time, most people were dead. Most people didn't live into their 80s. And here he is cultivating his life's work, and he created this next generation of amazing artists. And one of the things that you had said to me was that you were thinking about, although you had retired some time ago, you were thinking about, well, maybe there is some relevance, and that I'm in this work today, and that you had some ideas for new projects. Tell me more about that.
Well, you always want to have, as Clayton Christensen says, how do you measure your life? You want to have that contribution roll beyond where you are. You like to say, well, we've discovered these things inside people. People go, how did you ever think about the game? How did you ever write the book? Then I have a whole other slew of people who say, that book is so simple, I could have written it. And I've almost
kidding.
lost my tongue biting on it from not saying, yeah, but you didn't. So
But you didn't.
let's go beyond that.
We hear that as well.
Yeah. So I think it would be amazing if there's a way for us to figure out without I don't want to do what I did before individually, but it is a nice concept. And the fact that we're recording these and sharing them with people are nice. Also, maybe my grandchildren will go, whoa, what did that old grump do to make this trip possible? But, one of the things I thought about is that it would be appropriate to keep doing what we're doing to the extent that it meets your schedule, but then also ask or solicit from the people who view each one of these what their questions are.
I would love that.
And then maybe we just answer those questions next time around. But then in an offline conversation, Sean, I think there's maybe an organizational opportunity for us that allows this concept to go forward with the power of LSI as its engine, letting me be the keeper of the flame, so to speak, in terms of core philosophy. That would be a wonderful conversation to have.
I look forward to that, Chuck. What do you think about individually, and what's on your scorecard now?
Well, let me say this. Most people ask you, what do you like most about retirement, even if it's semi-retirement? And my answer has been for the last 10 years that I don't have any have-tos on my to-do list. I don't have to plow the snow, but it's, and you will relate to this, but when you sit where you are, or when I sat in that chair, and you start to worry about 1,800 mortgage payments and then each one of them has 3 kids. So now you got 540 children you have to worry about going to college and not getting screwed up. And I don't have that anymore. And so, it's interesting as we come around to the 2022 New Year's resolutions and the rest of that. Now that we've sort of got the house thing sorted out, I really need to take another look at that. But I would say right now, for me, mostly is enjoying the time, because, as the further you get from the beginning, the closer you are to the end. And I have 4 million Delta miles. I realize that's, and people go, ooh, ah, wow. And I go, nope, hard test of a misspent life right there. You just look at
That's
that
right.
thing and go,
I agree.
whoops.
I say the same thing.
Yeah. So I want to try to not overdo that, but to enjoy the fruits of labor and have, like we did at Christmas time with the kids and the grandkids, and do those kinds of things. And then, of course, I have to get a certain number of ski days in a year. So.
Well, when are we going to ski?
Well,
that's where this discussion needs to
happen.
Is on the mountain.
Yep, no question about it. And I went out Monday, and as you know, I'm struggling with a little back issue. Yep. And I got in my clothes and my boots on the hill, out of my clothes, out of my boots, and so the building block for our ski day has been established. Now tomorrow, I have a board of directors that I'm supposed to ski with, and that's going to be an interesting political conversation when I'm going, no, green runs are just fine for me. Yeah, you guys getting that bump filled over there. I'll see you at the chair.
Right.
But we're going to do that soon. But
I love it.
This is terrific. It's been very stimulating for me. And I think if we get people to submit some questions, we start looking at how can we do the most. But I think we should do this. I think we should do this regularly
I love that.
until we figure out a way to turn it into a service deliverable.
I love it.
And we'll do that at the appropriate time.
Chuck, thank you so much. I admire what you're doing, and this work, your work is timeless. That's what I think is. You talked about Peter Drucker and some of your Zig Ziglar, some of your mentors. You have developed this work that is really it's timeless, and even though the concept you developed 50 years ago could not be more relevant today than it was in the early 1970s when you thought of this. And I really admire that. Your writing is timeless. The concept is still going to be relevant in another 50 years, and that is your legacy, Chuck. That's incredible. And like I said, I really admire what you've done and your work. And thanks for doing this with me again. I look forward to our time on the Hill together and our next discussion.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Now here's my largest problem, okay, is the idols that have clay feet. So we used to have an O.J. Simpson story in the game of work, and it was a great story. Now he has to come out, okay? Then I thought Pete Rose was an example. Now he's out of the book, okay? And you know what my latest problem is? If you look on the cover of the Better People Leader, it says forward by the former national championship coach, Urban Meyer. So we'll be printing some more of those books, sans the cover. So, but yeah, it's just like, and as I said earlier, that servant leadership is a companion book.
It really is.
And where we've had servant leaders, the game of work has just been, knock your socks off.
Exactly.
Where you have a leader who doesn't capture that vision, it kind of turns into that micromanagement thing. And so we've always said in the beginning that there are some contracts we won't take after we've had an initial assessment, and that doesn't happen very often. And people say, well, how many times does it happen? And I said, well, let me tell you more about the times it should have happened and didn't, right. and wound up swimming upstream. So yeah, let's keep doing this. But I think if the audience wants to give us some questions, we can improvise and see how we can help them connect. Because what happens too often is, and you said it during the show, Sean, is that people say, I really love that concept. I just don't see how it applies here.
Yeah, right.
And one of the things I've learned about the game of work over 40 plus years is that everybody knows that the game of work will work any place else.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
So the Coke guys go, well, if we were a consulting company, we'd say, but we're just Coke, and the hamburger guys go, we're not bottling stuff. And so if we can do anything to help people bridge that gap between desire and belief, we'll be doing good work.
I agree. Chuck, thank you so much. And congratulations on your new home. And let me know how the skiing goes tomorrow. And I'm going to give you some days where we can go out.
Good. Love it. We'll make it happen.
Chuck. I hope you enjoyed this discussion that I had with Chuck, and I'm looking forward to having him be a regular guest on this podcast. He really has a lot of insight that is relevant to leadership, to building corporate culture, especially in this virtual environment, and also his work with business development organizations. And as we talked about, I'm looking forward to connecting with Chuck on his next project. I always am in awe of Chuck's ideas and his creativity. If you are interested in learning more about this episode, if you have an interest in connecting with Chuck, The Game of Work, Chuck Coonrad's multiple books, we will link all of that in the episode notes. Also, if you are interested in having the LSI team or the Game of Work team come into your organization and help build this kind of accountability, leadership model, especially with your virtual organizations, please contact us. And as always, if you're interested in strategy, process, training, capture, proposal development, program execution, economic development, or social impact, if you have a specific need that we can help you with, please reach out to us. We will have somebody connect with you quickly and address whatever needs you have. This was really fun. I really enjoyed this, and I appreciate Chuck's time in giving his thoughts on some of these questions that I threw at him. Thanks, everyone, and I look forward to our next episode.